Have you ever loved something so much that it felt like a part of your own body, a living, breathing extension of your own heart? For me, that's what architecture is. Not just steel and glass, not just blueprints and calculations. It's the soul of a space. It's the silent promise that a shelter can be more than a roof over your head. It can be an inspiration. And if you've ever felt that way, then maybe you can understand what it feels like to stand here in the cold shadow of the most celebrated building in this city and feel like I'm looking at the ghost of my own life. The Horizon Center. To everyone else in Chicago, it's a masterpiece. It rises from the concrete and asphalt like a crystal cathedral, its twin towers twisting towards the sky in a delicate dance of light and shadow. The newspapers called it a triumph of modern design, the city's new heart. Tourists crane their necks to capture its impossible curves, and young architects study its form with a reverence usually reserved for ancient wonders. They see genius in its lines. I see a lie. I see a beautiful, perfect, soul crushing lie. Because that building, it was born in my mind. It was sketched onto paper with my hands, late at night, in my tiny apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and a dream so big it terrified me. My father was a carpenter, not an architect. He didn't build skyscrapers, he built homes. He taught me that wood has a memory, that a well placed joint can outlast generations. He'd let me run my small hands over the grain of a freshly sanded plank and say, "Feel that, Elara? That's its story. Every building has one. Your job is to give it a good one to tell." I carried that with me always. The idea that buildings weren't just structures, they were storytellers. The Horizon Center was meant to tell a story of community, of bringing nature back into the heart of the city, of a space so open and full of light it could heal the people within it. That was my story, my soul. But as I stand here now, a decade later, I can feel something is wrong with it. It's not just the bitterness in my own heart that colors my perception. It's something deeper. The public doesn't see it yet, but I do. I see it in the way the morning light hits the grand atrium. It was designed to diffuse gently, like sunlight through a forest canopy. But now it feels harsh, almost accusatory. It's a theft that leaves no fingerprints. The world applauds your replacement, celebrating a forgery, while you are left as a phantom, an erased footnote in your own life's work. The city adores this building, but it doesn't know its secret. It doesn't know that its celebrated heart is built on a foundation of betrayal. The cracks beginning to show on its gleaming facade are just an echo of the fracture that shattered my world. It all started with a mentor's promise, a daughter's ambition, and a handshake that sealed my fate. Before he was the man who broke my world, Julian Croft was the man who built it. He found me when I was just a sketch on a page, a portfolio of ambitious but unrefined ideas. He was a living legend in the architectural world, the kind of man whose name was spoken with a hushed reverence. He saw my final year university project and sought me out personally. his voice on the phone like smooth gravel, telling me I had the eye. To be seen by him, by the great Julian Croft, was like being anointed. He offered me a junior position at his prestigious firm, Croft and Daughter, and I would have crawled over broken glass to accept it. For 3 years, he was the mentor I had only dreamed of. He pushed me, challenged me, and celebrated my small victories as if they were his own. He spoke my language, the language of light and form, of a building's soul. Never forget, Elara, he'd say, tapping a blueprint with his elegant finger. We are not building monuments to ourselves. We are building homes for the human spirit. I believed him. I trusted him implicitly. His daughter, Isabel, was the other half of the firm's name. She was everything I wasn't, poised, polished, and connected. She wore her legacy like a designer coat, effortlessly stylish, but lacking the warmth of genuine passion. She had her father's name, but not his vision. I saw the flash of jealousy in her eyes whenever Julian would praise one of my concepts. She saw me as a threat, a nobody from nowhere who was capturing the attention she felt was her birthright. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that talent, that hard work, would always speak for itself. I was so naive. Then came the Vanguard Prize. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a competition to design the new Chicago Horizon Center. This wasn't just another skyscraper, it was a chance to define the city's skyline for the next century. Winning would make a career, it would make a legend. For 6 months, I lived and breathed my design. I called it the canopy. This is your soul made visible. The competition rules allow for submissions from firms or individuals. The night before the deadline, Julian called me into his office. He said my design was revolutionary, but that the judges might be hesitant to award such a monumental project to a young, unknown architect. Let's submit it under the Croft and Daughter banner, he proposed, his hand on my shoulder. It gives the project the weight of my reputation. But you will be the named lead architect. This will be your triumph, Elara. I just want to help you cross the finish line. It felt like the ultimate act of mentorship. He was using his power not to overshadow me, but to lift me up. Overwhelmed with gratitude, I agreed. I handed over every digital file, every blueprint, every note. I handed him my soul. The weeks that followed were strange. Isabel avoided my gaze, and Julian was suddenly always in meetings. When I asked about the submission, he was vague. We're just polishing the presentation, adding the Croft touch, he'd say. The language began to shift subtly. My design became my conceptual sketches. My blueprints became your early drafts. A cold dread began to bloom in my chest. The day the winner was announced, the firm gathered in a grand auditorium. I sat in the 5th row, my heart hammering against my ribs. When they announced the winning project was the canopy, I thought I would faint from joy. Then the design flashed onto the giant screen behind the stage. It was mine. My lines, my light, my soul. with a few superficial changes to the facade. And beneath it, in stark white letters, were the names of the lead architects: Julian Croft and Isabel Croft. My name was nowhere. The sound in the auditorium faded to a dull roar in my ears. I saw my dream on that screen, and next to it, the names of my thieves. They were on stage, smiling, waving to a thundering ovation for a story they had never written. My feet were cemented to the floor, but somehow I found myself moving. The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that I had to push through. My mind was a white hot storm of denial and rage. This was a mistake, a typo on the screen, a horrible error, he said, his voice low and urgent. You're emotional. This has been a huge project for all of us. Your contribution was valuable, of course, a wonderful starting point. But a conceptual sketch is not a finished building. It took Isabel and me months of work to solve the structural and engineering problems you couldn't. We made it viable. We made it a winner. I stared at him, my mind reeling. A starting point? Julian, the core philosophy, the light diffusion system, the entire spatial flow. That was all mine. That was the canopy. Isabel stepped forward, her eyes cold. The firm won, Elera. You should be happy for us. Your junior architect's salary was paid for you to produce ideas for us. You did your job. Now you're being hysterical, and frankly, it's embarrassing. That's when the rage finally broke through the shock. I have proof, I said, my voice gaining a dangerous edge. I have the original files, the metadata, the date-stamped sketches. I will take this to the Architects Guild. I will take this to the press. The smile vanished completely from Julian's face. The charming mentor was gone, replaced by a chillingly calm stranger. I thought you might, he said quietly, and I would advise you very strongly not to do that. You see, while you were perfecting your soulful sketches, I, as your responsible supervisor, was keeping a file that documents your repeated struggles with the project's technical requirements, a file containing emails where I and other senior architects had to correct your fundamental errors. It paints a picture of a talented but deeply troubled junior who buckled under pressure and whose final concepts were sadly unworkable without our complete overhaul. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's not true. You're lying. Am I? He asked, his voice silky smooth. It will be my word against yours. The word of Julian Croft against a terminated employee with a history of what now appears to be emotional instability. Who do you think they will believe? Have you ever had the ground beneath your feet turn to quicksand? That's what it felt like. They hadn't just planned to steal my work. They had planned to annihilate me if I fought back. It was a perfect, premeditated crime. In the weeks that followed, their gilded cage of lies became my reality. They were on the cover of every major architectural magazine, standing proudly in front of renderings of my design. They gave interviews on morning television, with Isabel talking about how the idea for the atrium came to her in a dream. My colleagues at the firm stopped answering my calls. Then the whispers started, spreading through the industry like a virus. I was unstable, a disgruntled employee trying to claim credit for my boss's genius. They were meticulously poisoning my past, and every single day from my small apartment window, I could see the cranes moving, the steel skeleton of the Horizon Center beginning its ascent. They were building their monument on the grave of my career, and I was utterly, terrifyingly powerless to stop them. The first time it happened, I thought it was a fluke. I was in a sleek, minimalist office, sitting across from a partner at a respectable firm. He looked at my portfolio, his eyebrows raised in appreciation. "This is very impressive work, Miss Vance," he said. Then his eyes landed on my resume. "Ah, Croft and Daughter, you were there during the Horizon Center design phase. A remarkable achievement. What was your role exactly?" I took a breath and gave the carefully rehearsed, neutral answer I'd practiced. I spoke of my contributions to the conceptual development. The man's polite smile never wavered, but a subtle shudder fell behind his eyes. He had heard the stories. He asked a few more perfunctory questions and then stood, his handshake limp and final. The interview was over. The second time, the rejection was quicker. The 10th time, I couldn't even get an interview. The whispers had solidified into fact. Julian Croft's narrative had become the official history. I was the unstable junior who had tried to steal his glory. In the small, incestuous world of high end architecture, my name was poison. Doors I hadn't even knocked on were already bolted shut. Friends from the firm, people I had shared late night coffees and creative breakthroughs with, would cross the street to avoid me. My calls went to voicemail, my emails disappeared into the digital ether. I was excommunicated. My passion, the one thing that had defined my entire existence, became a source of exquisite torture. I couldn't look at the Chicago skyline without feeling a physical wave of nausea. Every elegant spire, every bold facade was a reminder of the world I had lost, and the Horizon Center. It was my constant, silent tormentor. Its skeleton of steel grew flesh of glass and stone, climbing higher each day, visible from almost every corner of the city. It was the first thing I saw when I woke up, and the last thing I saw before a sleepless night. It was the tombstone of I took the boxes to the alley behind my apartment building. One by one, I pulled out my creations, my life's work. With tears streaming down my face, I ripped the blueprints to shreds. I smashed the models against the brick wall, the sound of splintering balsa wood echoing the shattering of my own spirit. I was destroying the evidence of a life that no longer existed. It was a funeral pyre for the foolish, naive girl who believed that talent was enough. I moved into a cramped, windowless room in a part of the city the tourists never see. To pay the rent, I took a job as a data entry clerk for a logistics company. My world shrank to the size of a spreadsheet. My days measured in keystrokes and error margins. My hands, which were meant to design cathedrals, now just typed numbers. I was anonymous. I was invisible. One night, during the grand opening gala for the Horizon Center, I was working a late shift. The city was alive with fireworks, their brilliant colors reflecting off the windows of my office. On a small television in the break room, I watched Julian and Isabel Croft, beaming as they cut a large blue ribbon. The crowd roared. In a city of millions celebrating my stolen dream, I had never felt so utterly alone. Elara Vance, the architect, was truly dead. I just wasn't sure if I had the strength to bury her. Grief is a patient architect. It builds a house of grey around you, brick by silent brick, until you forget what sunlight feels like. For the first year after my fall, I lived inside that house. My life was a flat line of keystrokes, tasteless food, and dreamless sleep. I had successfully erased myself, becoming a ghost in my own life, long before my body gave out. The fire that had once fueled me, the relentless passion to create, had been reduced to a single, cold ember of Mahadi survival. The change didn't come as a lightning strike. It was much quieter than that. On my walk to the bus stop every evening, I passed an old, derelict brick warehouse. It was a husk of a building, its windows boarded up, its facade tattooed with graffiti. Most people saw it as an eyesore, a piece of urban decay waiting for the wrecking ball. But one evening, something made me stop. I looked past the brokenness and saw its bones, the proud, simple strength of its century-old brickwork, the elegant honesty of its steel trusses, now rusted but still unbowed. It had a story. This quiet observation became my obsession. I started studying not design, but decay, not creation, but consequence. I devoured books on structural engineering, material science, and building pathology. And that's when I discovered a new world, a niche field I never knew existed: forensic architecture. It was the science of reading a building's secrets. It was about finding the truth written in a stress fracture, the story told by a corroded steel beam, the lie revealed by a flawed foundation. It wasn't about the soul of a building, it was about its scars. And I understood scars. To pursue this, Elara Vance had to stay dead. Her name was an anchor tied to a ghost. So I went to the courthouse and began the process of burying her for good. I chose a new name, Ava Chen. Ava, for a new beginning. Chen, a name common enough to be invisible. It was a quiet legal ritual, but for me, it was a resurrection. Elara was the dreamer they had destroyed. Ava would be the analyst they would never see coming. The next 5 years were a blur of relentless, solitary work. I waited tables at a 24-hour diner, the smell of grease and coffee clinging to me like a second skin. Every dollar I saved went towards online certifications and advanced degrees in structural engineering. My tiny room became a library. I learned to read concrete fatigue like a novel, to understand the subtle language of metal stress. I became a digital nomad, an anonymous consultant online, building a quiet but formidable reputation under my new name for being able to diagnose a building's problems from nothing but data and photographs. I wasn't building monuments anymore. I was performing autopsies on them. And then, one morning, a news alert popped up in my feed. The headline read, "Chicago's Jewel shows signs of premature aging. Experts question Horizon Center's longevity." I clicked the link. The article was filled with reports of widening cracks in the facade, mysterious leaks in the sublevels, and strange groaning sounds the building would make on windy days. My building. It was talking. It was telling its story of pain. and I realized I was the only person in the world who knew how to speak its language. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was sterile, professional, and routed through 3 layers of corporate law firms. It spoke of a prestigious new construction commercial tower in a major American city that was exhibiting anomalous and accelerated structural fatigue. The client, the building's primary insurance underwriter, had read my papers on resonant frequencies in complex glass facades. They had exhausted local options and were now seeking an outside, distant star I had stopped navigating by. My work, my new life as Ava Chen, was about finding objective truth, not settling old scores. But this felt different. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the building. My building was sick, and I was the only doctor in the world who knew the cause of the disease. I replied with 2 words: I'm available. Flying back into Chicago was a surreal experience. As the plane descended, the skyline I once knew by heart came into view, now dominated by the twin towers of the Horizon Center. From the air, the floors were invisible. It was still a masterpiece, a gleaming monument to my erasure. But I was no longer the heartbroken girl who had fled this city. Elara Vance wore her heart on her sleeve. Ava Chen wore a tailored charcoal suit, her hair cut in a severe, sharp bob. Elara was a passionate artist. Ava was a clinical analyst. This was my armor. My first meeting was with the building's board of directors and a panel of city engineers. They sat around a long mahogany table, their faces etched with worry and frustration. When I walked in, I could feel the ripple of surprise. They were expecting A.C. Chen to be a man, or at least someone older. I was a ghost they didn't recognize. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I put up the initial data on the screen and spoke in the cold, precise language of structural diagnostics. I talked about tensile stress, material hysteresis, and microfracture propagation. I laid out my methodology for a full building audit, a process so thorough and invasive that it made them shift uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. I had their full undivided attention. No one mentioned the name Croft. It was the elephant in the room, trumpeting its silence. That night, they gave me a master keycard and full unrestricted access. My first visit was after midnight. The building was a hollow, echoing shell, asleep and dreaming its troubled dreams. I walked through the grand atrium, my footsteps the only sound. 6 years ago, this space had been the theater of my public humiliation. Now it was my patient. I ran my gloved hand over the vast marble walls, feeling for the subtle vibrations that the city's hum sent through its bones. I attached acoustic sensors to the main support columns, my laptop screen showing the building's faint rhythmic stress patterns. Have you ever returned to the scene of a great trauma? Every shadow seems to hold a memory. Every echo sounds like it wasn't a flaw in the steel or the glass. It was a flaw in the relationship between them, a fatal incompatibility. They had changed my facade design to make it more dramatic, but they didn't understand that it was intrinsically linked to the load distribution of the entire structure. They had stolen my symphony, but they had tried to conduct it with a broken baton. And now the beautiful music was turning into a scream. My preliminary report landed on the mahogany table with a soft, definitive thud. For 2 hours, I walked the board through the data. I showed them the thermal imaging that revealed heat stress along the western facade, the ultrasonic scans that mapped the internal microfractures, the seismic data that showed how the building vibrated in a state of constant low grade distress. I explained in cold, clinical terms that the problems were not due to faulty materials or poor construction, as they had hoped. The flaw was woven into the very DNA of the design. The modifications made to the facade's weight distribution, I said, pointing to a complex 3D model on the screen, are in direct conflict with the fundamental load bearing principles of the building's core structure. It's like putting the engine of a freight train into the body of a sports car. The frame was never designed to handle that kind of specific, localized stress. It is, I'm afraid, a catastrophic design flaw. A heavy silence filled the room. The word design was the kill shot. It moved the blame from the contractors to the architects. Their lawyers immediately advised them that before any legal or remedial action could be taken, the architects of record had to be brought in to consult. A formal meeting was scheduled. They were going to walk into my examination room, and they had no idea I was the surgeon. I spent the next 48 hours preparing. I slept little, running simulations, cross-referencing my data, and building a wall of irrefutable objective fact. There would be no room for bluster, no space for reputation to hide. This would not be an emotional confrontation. It would be a clinical dissection. The meeting was held in the main conference room on the 50th floor, a glass box suspended in the sky with a panoramic view of the city, a room I had designed to inspire a feeling of boundless possibility. Today, it felt like an arena. I was there first, setting up my presentation, then they arrived. Julian Croft looked older than I expected. The 6 years of lauded success had not been kind to him. There were deep lines of strain around his eyes, and the confident charisma I remembered had been replaced by a kind of brittle authority. Isabel was beside him, impeccably dressed and radiating a defensive hostility. They looked at me, this young woman. Elara Vance was a soft, deferential girl. Ava Chen was a blade. Miss Chen, the chairman began, this is Julian and Isabel Croft, the visionaries behind this magnificent building. I nodded, my expression neutral. Mr. Croft, Miss Croft. I began immediately, my voice calm and even. I put the schematics on the screen and pointed to the precise junction points I had identified. The issue begins here. I walked them through the cascading failure, the way the stress on the facade was being transferred improperly to the internal support structure. The result, I concluded, is a progressive structural decay that is approximately 15 years ahead of schedule. Julian began to bluster, just as I knew he would. All new buildings of this scale have a settling period. What you're seeing are minor tolerance variances. I cut him off, not by raising my voice, but by putting up a new slide. These are not tolerance variances, Mr. Croft. This is a live feed from a vibration sensor on beam 7B in the western quadrant. It is currently oscillating at a frequency 12% outside of its designated safety parameters. That is not settling. That is a symptom of systemic distress. Isabel attacked from another angle. With all due respect, Miss Chen, you've been here for a week. My father and I lived and breathed this design for years. Who are you to make such dramatic claims? I turned my full attention to her, my gaze unwavering. I am the analyst who has the data, Miss Croft. The building doesn't care about our feelings or our resumes. It only responds to the laws of physics. For the next hour, I dismantled their masterpiece, piece by piece, with their own design files. I showed them how their changes had created the very problems they were now facing. The air grew thick with tension. Julian's face was pale. This stranger knew his building with an impossible intimacy. Then I delivered the first subtle cut. I put up a slide showing an elegant, non invasive engineering solution for one of the minor flaws. A more holistic approach to the design, I said, my eyes locking with Julian's, might have integrated the facade's support system directly into the core frame, like so. It would have harmonized the load. The word holistic hung in the air between us. It was a word Ilara had used 1,000 times in his office. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not recognition, but a deep primal. And at the center table sat Julian and Isabel Croft, defiant, ready to defend their legacy. I was seated a few feet away, the anonymous consultant who had lit the fuse. The Crofts were called to testify first. Julian, summoning the last reserves of his once great charisma, was masterful. He spoke of unforeseen soil settlement, unprecedented wind shear, and even blamed faulty materials from a supplier who had since gone bankrupt. He was weaving a tapestry of plausible deniability. Isabel followed, attacking my report as the sensationalist work of a young, inexperienced analyst seeking to make a name for herself. They were trying to paint me as the villain. Then the council chair called my name. Miss Ava Chen, please approach. A hush fell over the room as I walked to the podium. The cameras zoomed in. I could feel Julian's stare, full of condescending rage. I calmly set up my presentation. The structural failures of the Horizon Center are not in dispute. I began, my voice steady. My purpose today is not to re-examine the symptoms of the building's illness, but to identify the origin of the disease. To do that, we must conduct what is known in my field as a digital architectural autopsy. I started with the data, the cold, hard physics. But then I moved to my second slide. All digital design files contain metadata, a kind of digital fingerprint, traces of their creation. Working with a data recovery firm, we were able to extract the original, unaltered metadata from the earliest core design files submitted to the city's planning commission by Croft and Daughter. On the giant screen, a block of code appeared. I highlighted one line, author, Vance E. And next to it, the creation dates, all logged nearly 8 months before the Vanguard Prize was even awarded. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Julian went ghost white. But metadata can be complex, I continued, pressing forward before they could interrupt. Let's talk about something more fundamental, the architect's signature. I explained the concept that every architect has a unique, subconscious design language, a set of ratios and spatial relationships that are as unique as a fingerprint. I put up slides of my university projects, of my early uncredited work at Croft and Daughter, highlighting my signature, a specific golden ratio I applied to vertical and horizontal spaces. Then I put up the core schematics of the Horizon Center, and I showed them. There, embedded, you can see that each modification clashes with the core principles of the original design. They are not improvements, they are scars. Each one of these scars is a point of structural conflict, and they have been tearing this building apart from the inside out. The room was in stunned silence. A councilwoman leaned into her microphone, her face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Miss Chen, she asked, this is this is explosive. This evidence implies that Evans was the true original designer. How could you possibly have this information? Who is this person? I let the question hang in the air for a moment, the silence stretching until it was almost unbearable. I turned my head and looked directly at Julian Croft. The man was utterly broken, his face a mask of abject terror. He finally knew. He was looking at a ghost, and the ghost was about to speak its name. I turned back to the council. Evans was the architect who designed this building, I said, my voice clear and carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. I have this information because the files, the signature, and the soul of this building are all mine. My name is Elara Vance. For a single, silent second, the world held its breath. Then it shattered. The room exploded in a supernova of flashing cameras and shouted questions. My name, my real name, Elara Vance, was being fired like a volley of bullets from the press gallery. The council chair banged his gavel, but the sound was lost in the tidal wave of chaos. This was the eruption. This was the sound of a carefully constructed lie being torn apart at the seams. Isabel was the first to find her voice. She shot to her feet, her face contorted in a mask of rage and disbelief. "This is a circus," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's a fraud, a disgruntled former employee with a pathetic fantasy. We have documentation, years of it." Her voice was shrill, desperate. She was fighting a war that her own father already knew was lost. Because Julian didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his hands flat on the table, as if to keep himself from floating away. He wasn't looking at the panicked council members or his frantic daughter. He was looking only at me, and in his eyes I saw the entire story unfold in seconds. The flicker of confusion giving way to the horror of recognition, then the crushing weight of shame, and finally the quiet resignation of a man watching his entire life's legacy burn to the ground. He was finally meta. Sex, but he just looked at me, his gaze full of a terrible newfound clarity. His voice, when it came, was a broken whisper, amplified by the microphone to every corner of the room and to every television in the city. "She's telling the truth." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Isabel made a small, strangled sound. "All of it," he continued, his voice gaining a strange, heart-breaking strength. The design was hers, the concept, the vision, the soul of it was Elara's. She was the most brilliant young architect I had ever seen, and I was afraid. My best work was behind me, and she was the future. I was jealous of her talent and terrified of being forgotten. He took a ragged breath. So I took it. We took it. And we built a lie to protect the theft. We ruined her career because we didn't have the integrity to admit she was better than us. He then turned his body fully towards me, speaking only to me, though the world was listening. I took your masterpiece, and because I didn't understand it, I broke it. I didn't just steal your future, Elara. I tried to erase your soul, and for that, I am profoundly and eternally sorry. He collapsed back into his chair, a broken man. I had expected to feel triumphant, to feel the sweet satisfaction of justice, but watching the man I once idolized, publicly confessing his sins, the only thing I felt was a vast, hollow sadness. The truth, it turned out, was a heavy, graceless thing. Security guards had to escort me out through the media frenzy. As I was being pushed through the throng, a man grabbed my arm. I recognized him, a senior architect from the old firm, a man who had avoided my eyes for 6 years. Elara, he said, his own eyes full of shame. We knew something was wrong. We were just cowards. I'm so sorry. It was the first drop of rain on a barren land. That night, my face was on every screen, the ghost who had returned to claim her name. The lie was dead, but as the adrenaline finally faded, I was left alone in my hotel room with a new, daunting question. After the demolition, what do you build in its place? The fallout from Julian's confession was swift and absolute. Croft and Daughter imploded under the weight of lawsuits and public disgrace. The Architects Guild permanently revoked Julian's license, a symbolic execution for a career that had, in truth, the idea of tearing down my creation, even a flawed version of it, felt like a second death. So I did the one thing I had left to do. I wrote. I penned an open letter to the people of Chicago, published in the city's largest newspaper. A building is not a person, I wrote. It cannot be malicious. It cannot lie. The Horizon Center is a victim in this story, just as I was. It was born of a pure idea: community, light, and harmony. It was then scarred by fear and arrogance. To demolish it now would be to let that fear win. Let us not punish this structure for the sins of its builders. Instead, let us heal it. Let us prove that we are strong enough to correct our mistakes, to rebuild with integrity. Its bones are good. Its soul is true. Let's give it the life it was always meant to have. The letter turned the tide of public opinion. The idea of redemption resonated more deeply than the desire for destruction. A week later, in a move that stunned the entire industry, the city council formally offered me the contract. They wanted me, Elara Vance, to lead the remediation of the Horizon Center. It was a public act of atonement, A chance to not only save my building, but to finally realize my original, untainted vision. The 2 years that followed were the most challenging and rewarding of my life. Rebuilding the flawed structure was a mirror to rebuilding my own life. It required patience, painstaking attention to detail, and a team built on transparency and trust. We didn't just patch the cracks, we went down to the bones and made them right. We reinforced the core, redesigned the connections, and recalibrated the facade until the entire building hummed in perfect, harmonious resonance. We healed it. Which brings me to today. I am standing in the grand atrium of the newly rededicated Horizon Center. The light filters down from above, soft and warm, just as I dreamed it would all those years ago in my tiny apartment. The space is filled with the quiet hashtag at Meta _post sex 0.05. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters. Remember to like this video if you believe in the power of resilience, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about the quiet courage it takes to rebuild a life. Hit that notification bell because your own next chapter might be the one that inspires someone else. Remember that your signature, your unique mark on the world, can never truly be stolen. It can only wait for you to be brave enough to claim it once more.